Tracy Denise Gostomski was born on August 28, 1970 in Omaha, Nebraska, a bustling city with a population of over 486,000 inhabitants. The only child of John and Mary, Tracy enjoyed a typical childhood. However, when she was around 10 years old, her parents' marriage ended in separation. Sometime later, her father, John, remarried a woman named Patty, with whom Tracy reportedly shared a wonderful relationship. Those who knew Tracy, including family and friends, described her as a warm-hearted individual with a genuine love for animals. If she saw someone walking a dog, she would often stop to greet and pet the animal. That spirit of kindness defined her personality. As an adult, Tracy crossed paths with a man named Stanley Tribble. In July 2003, Tracy married Stanley Tribble and became Tracy Tribble. The couple settled into a house in the suburbs where they had a pet dog. However, their marriage began on a shaky foundation, characterized by constant fighting and tension. Just a few months after tying the knot, a domestic violence incident occurred when Stanley attempted to strangle Tracy. This resulted in his arrest, and he spent a few days in jail. Despite the severity of the situation, Tracy later chose to withdraw her complaint, leading to Stanley's release. Throughout their time together, the couple's life remained tumultuous, with frequent arguments and disputes. At that time, Stanley was employed as a car salesman at a dealership, while Tracy had recently begun working at a travel company. Before taking this new position, she had worked at a different company in the same role. The couple lived in a rented house owned by a friend named Chris Bryson. Those close to them noted that both Tracy and Stanley had a tendency to drink excessively, which exacerbated their already tumultuous relationship. During most of their arguments, they would be intoxicated, leading to heated fights where they would scream at each other. The volume of their disputes was so high that neighbors could easily hear them, often prompting some of the more annoyed individuals to call the police. It is said that despite these disturbances, the couple was not evicted from their rented home due to their friendship with the landlord. The troubled relationship between Tracy and Stanley was well known among family and friends, who were all too aware of their frequent and intense arguments. Despite the turmoil, they remained together, including on May 1st, 2006, when they engaged in a particularly explosive dispute at home. Their landlord, Chris Bryson, was called to the scene, though it's unclear whether he was alerted by a neighbor or by Tracy or Stanley themselves. Upon Chris's arrival, he found himself in the middle of yet another heated fight between the couple, which escalated to the point where Tracy hurled a phone at Stanley's face. Thankfully, their close relationship with Chris likely saved them from eviction, as he was a friend and understood the complexities of their situation. Even in the chaos, Chris attempted to diffuse the tension. Over the following days, Tracy confided in several friends about the argument. One friend, alarmed by the situation, advised Tracy that it might be best to avoid staying in the same house with her husband, as the risk of escalation was too great. On May 3, 2006, Tracy made arrangements with her friend Melissa to visit her house before work for some quality time and to do their nails. However, when the day arrived, Tracy failed to show up. Concerned, Melissa attempted to reach out to her multiple times through calls and messages, but Tracy did not respond. The situation worsened when Tracy also missed her evening shift at work. Later that day, Stanley returned home from work and contacted his sister, with whom Tracy maintained a close friendship. He expressed his worry, mentioning that Tracy still had not returned and that the previous night had been particularly distressing due to her excessive drinking and erratic behavior. Stanley explained that when he left for work, he noticed Tracy was still at home. However, upon returning later that day, he realized Tracy had not come back. He initially thought she might have spent the night at a friend's house, but found that her car was in the garage along with all the belongings she typically took when she stayed elsewhere, including her purse, wallet, and house key, all of which were left on the kitchen counter. This was puzzling to him, as Tracy would never leave without those essential items. Additionally, he mentioned that she seemed to have wanted to provoke him that evening, preventing him from getting any sleep. Later, the Animal Protection Service called the couple's house. When Stanley answered the call, he learned that the family's dog had been found wandering the neighborhood without a leash. This struck him as very odd, as Tracy would never leave their dog alone in the street. Concerned, he called Tracy's family and friends to see if anyone had any information on her whereabouts. Unfortunately, everyone he spoke to was unaware of her location. Only Melissa, a friend with whom Tracy had made plans to chat and do their nails before work, mentioned that she had spoken to Tracy, but she hadn't shown up as expected. Stanley also reached out to Tracy's co-workers, who confirmed that she had not attended work that day. After making these calls, Stanley felt it was necessary to reach out to the authorities to report what had transpired. A police team quickly arrived at his home, where the officers began collecting as much information as they could. Stanley shared that he and Tracy had experienced conflicts in the days leading up to her disappearance, including a significant argument the night before. He recounted an incident from a year earlier, in 2005, when Tracy had displayed signs of deep sadness and a bleak outlook on life. During that time, she had even contemplated taking her own life, which led to her admission to a psychiatric clinic for intervention. Though Tracy had made considerable progress and was released from the clinic, restoring a sense of normalcy in their lives, their relationship continued to be fraught with disputes. Recently, the situation had worsened, as Tracy had been drinking heavily, which only intensified their conflicts. Stanley conveyed to the police his profound fear that Tracy might harm herself, a concern echoed by both the authorities and Tracy's family. Both the police and Tracy's family observed that Stanley recounted the troubling events with a surprising lack of emotion, leading some to believe he was exhausted from the ongoing chaos of their relationship. This was not the first instance of Tracy going missing, as she had previously disappeared and returned days later. However, the last incident was different. On that occasion, Tracy took her car and a few belongings with her. On May 4th, detectives from the Missing Persons Unit arrived at Stanley's workplace, seeking to discuss the situation further. Upon their arrival, the detectives inquired with Stanley about the availability of a more private space within the busy car dealership where they could conduct their conversation discreetly. However, Stanley indicated that there was no need for a separate room, suggesting that they could speak right there in the middle of the showroom, surrounded by onlookers. The detectives found his lack of concern unusual, but proceeded to engage in their discussion in that open setting. Throughout the interaction, Stanley remained composed and quite cooperative. He permitted the detectives to search his vehicle, his home, and various personal items, yet they found nothing out of the ordinary. Additionally, he exhibited no signs of physical injury. There were no scratches, bruises, or any other marks on his body that could suggest he had recently been involved in a confrontation with someone. As you may know, when an assailant engages a victim, the instinctive reaction often leads to the victim fighting back. This defensive response can result in physical evidence left on the attacker, including scratches, bite marks, or minor bruises. During the preliminary phase of the investigation, detectives did not rule out Stanley as a potential suspect. However, the absence of any incriminating evidence, coupled with his cooperative demeanor, led them to consider the possibility that he might not be involved in the case. In the days that followed, police continued their investigation and conducted searches in hopes of finding Tracy. To aid in the search for Tracy, friends and even Stanley participated in the efforts. Additionally, some family members traveled from another state to Nebraska to help. They created and distributed flyers containing Tracy's picture and information. To bolster the efforts in locating Tracy, friends and even Stanley joined the search activities. In addition, some of Tracy's family members, who resided in another state, traveled to Nebraska to assist. They created flyers featuring Tracy's pictures and information, which they distributed throughout the area. This outreach led to many individuals who had previously not been aware of the case learning about it. Several community volunteers also stepped forward to help with the search. The atmosphere in the community was tense, as only months earlier, a 12-year-old girl named Amber Harris had mysteriously vanished. Amber disappeared while waiting at a school bus stop in Omaha, prompting a significant search effort. However, by the time Tracy went missing, Amber had still not been found. The search for Amber concluded 6 months after her disappearance. During this time, a man named Roy Ellis Jr. was arrested and charged with her abduction. Amber's backpack containing her DNA was discovered near his residence. Prior to Amber becoming his victim, Roy Ellis Jr. had a history of committing several other crimes and is currently on death row, awaiting execution. On May 10th, another woman, Jessica O'Grady, vanished after driving to the home of a co-worker, Christopher Edwards, with whom she had recently started a relationship. Jessica went to inform him that she was pregnant. After that, Jessica vanished without a trace. her fate remaining a mystery. Although her case has since been resolved with Christopher in prison, her body has never been recovered. During the time these cases unfolded, the community was instilled with fear as rumors began to circulate about a potential serial killer being behind the disappearances. Authorities limited their comments and continued their investigations without any clear answers. In a bid to find her, Tracy's family offered a reward of $70,000 for any information that could lead to her whereabouts. Additionally, an ex-boyfriend of Tracy actively participated in the search efforts, even consulting a medium who claimed to have sensed her energy. Tracy's father provided a statement indicating that he had spoken with his daughter just 2 days prior to her disappearance. During that conversation, she reportedly expressed happiness in her new job and shared plans for her future. Additionally, he voiced his suspicions regarding Stanley, Tracy's husband, whom he felt appeared unconcerned, as if he did not genuinely care. Tracy's father even suggested that Stanley should undergo a polygraph test, commonly known as a lie detector test. On May 19, 2006, the body was discovered, unclothed and bearing numerous visible injuries, indicating that the woman had been severely beaten while alive. Authorities speculated that the remains could belong to either Tracy or Jessica. Subsequently, the body was identified as that of Tracy Tribble's, located 5 miles from her home. When Stanley was informed about his wife's death, he remained unnervingly calm and showed no visible reaction, not even asking any questions. During the autopsy, it became evident that Tracy had been brutally beaten with a blunt object, possibly a baseball bat or a metal bar. She sustained severe injuries, including multiple skull fractures, a broken jaw, and missing teeth, while her face had been nearly crushed from the force of the assault. Additionally, numerous injuries were found across her body, indicating the extent of the violence she had endured. Tracy had endured numerous broken bones, and a toxicology analysis revealed that on the day of her death, she had consumed a significant amount of alcohol, likely rendering her very drunk. This condition suggested that she had little to no chance of defending herself. Initially, the cause of death was determined to be the result of multiple fractures and internal bleeding. However, the medical examiner indicated the possibility that Tracy may have also been strangled, though this could not be conclusively established due to the advanced state of decomposition of her body. The medical examiner expressed shock at the brutality of the attack, noting that Tracy's injuries were consistent with those expected from a hit-and-run, underscoring the severity of her condition. The medical examiner stated that whoever committed the crime likely harbored considerable anger toward Tracy. It was suggested that the assailant was someone close to her, someone who knew her well. Early in the investigation, this theory gained traction, particularly after the detectives' discussions with Stanley, especially considering Tracy's previous admission to a psychiatric clinic for suicidal tendencies. However, the autopsy report and the medical examiner's statements ruled out any possibility that Tracy had taken her own life. The severity of her injuries clearly indicated that it would have been impossible for her to inflict such wounds upon herself, especially given her state of intoxication. It was clear that Tracy Tribble had fallen victim to a violent crime. The news of her tragic fate devastated her family, with the exception of Stanley. When they learned the truth about what had happened to Tracy, the impact was profound. Tracy's funeral was held on May 31, 2006, at Evergreen Memorial Park Cemetery in Omaha. Many attended the farewell ceremony, including family, friends, and co-workers, all united in their grief. While her loved ones mourned, the police continued their investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. In August 2006, Stanley Tribble was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. In police custody, he confided in fellow inmates, claiming he had killed Tracy because he wanted her to be quiet. He went on to describe how the violence escalated, noting that he realized he couldn't turn back after striking her on the head for the first time. He knew he couldn't turn back. Instead of stopping, he continued to beat her until he grew tired. He recounted the harrowing experience, stating that he could hear her bones breaking as he delivered the blows. This brutal attack occurred around 2 a.m., after which he staged the scene to align with the fabricated story he had created. Although Stanley initially refused to confess officially, the information he shared with the 2 inmates did not remain secret for long. These inmates reported his confessions to the authorities, leading to Stanley's trial months later. The testimony of these two crucial witnesses ultimately contributed to the jury's decision to find him guilty. As a consequence, Stanley Tribble was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of his wife, Tracy Tribble. Sometime later, his defense team sought to appeal the sentence and requested a new trial. However, the presiding judge denied this request. Currently, Stanley remains incarcerated in a Nebraska prison where he will spend the rest of his life.